Welcome to another episode of the Football Analytics Show. My name is Ed Fang, your host. And on this episode, I am pumped to have Tej Seth on the show. He's a football analytics expert, and he is the co-host of the Stats and Scheme podcast. Tej, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me again, Ed. Really fun to always talk ball with you on the show.
Yeah, and we're going to get into a lot of fun topics. I decided that we would not talk about Michigan football because I don't think anyone wanted to hear us whine about it for a while, but it is always good to get your insights. The Football Analytics Show is brought to you by the Power Ranks Sports Betting newsletter. Looking for some action on any given weekend? This is the free service for you, as 5 Nugget Saturday is my curated list of tips and analytics. To sign up for free, go to thepowerrank.com. That is my site for better sports betting information through data and analytics. Once again, that's thepowerrank.com. Tej, we are going to talk about the Detroit Lions, though. Right now in the markets, they are the second most likely team to win the Super Bowl. Do they deserve this?
I do actually think that the Lions deserve to be in the top 2 or 3 teams to win the Super Bowl right now. I can't believe I'm saying that, as a lifelong fan, but when you look at the Lions, like you start with point differential, and they do lead the league in that, which we know is a very important metric for predicting future performance. But once you go deeper, you can see that this team is built well fundamentally, both on offense and on defense, where you have this offense that can beat you in so many different ways. They like to rely on the run game with David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs behind a really good offensive line, and that usually works for them in most games. Struggled a little bit against the Texans, but they were able to rebound later in the game with the run game. And then you have this pass game where they have weapons that can really step up on certain days. Like Amon-Ra St. Brown is usually the constant in the pass catching group, but you have Sam Laporta, who's seen his target share rise a little bit in recent weeks. You have other weapons like Tim Patrick and Jamison Williams and Khalif Raymond who can step up on any given day. And so that's been good as well. And then on the defensive side, we haven't really seen a Lions defense play this well in a long time here, where you have Brian Branch, who I think is a Defensive Player of the Year candidate right now at safety, who can affect the game in so many different ways. And then on each level of the defense, you have Aleem McNeil on the defensive line, who can also get pressure on the quarterback. And then Alex Anzalone and Jack Campbell as your linebacker duo, who can also play pretty well as well.
I definitely asked you this question first to test your analytics chops versus your fandom for the Lions. It was definitely a planned test, but completely agree. I do think this Detroit Lions team is legit. You actually posted Jared Goff about how high his EPA, or expected points added, was on deep throws, meaning throws of air yards of greater than 20 yards. I believe that this type of performance tends to be pretty volatile. I think Dr. Eric Eager did some of that work in his book. So is that volatile, and do you kind of expect that performance from Goff to continue?
It is definitely volatile. You're dealing with smaller sample size when looking at throws of 20 plus air yards. And like the biggest example of this right now is like Russell Wilson leading the league in EPA per pass on these deep passes. And so like there's just some expected regression from when you're passing at that high of a clip deep. But I think when you look at the Lions, like and where their offense was most successful last year and parts of this year, it's like a lot of the short throws that can get yards after catch opportunities is probably where Ben Johnson wants to be when calling this offense. Like Goff had a very low average at the target last year. It's increased a bit this year because of the success they've been having with the deep balls. But if some of that success goes away, I would probably think that Ben Johnson would lean more back into those like 3 to 8 air yard throws that are getting yards after catch opportunities that are going past the first down marker.
I was just thinking about this. Did you post that Goff EPA thing, or actually not just for Goff, but for every quarterback? Did you post it before Sunday night's game against Houston?
Posted it after.
You posted it after. Okay, so he still had one of the highest EPA on air yards greater than 20. despite his horrific performance on those types of throws against Houston, it was a situation in which, I mean, Goff threw 5 picks, and a lot of them were on deep balls. And what seemed really odd to me was the strain with which he had to put in to like get the ball downfield that much. I just not something you expect. You expect to be a little bit more fluid for someone who's a pro and an NFL quarterback. I think not only the picks, but just like I guess is it out of the normal for Goff to kind of chuck it that deep? And I certainly would expect that Ben Johnson is not going to call up too many more of those plays, or just
I agree
taking
with you.
shots.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean that's what I assume will happen is the interceptions on those deep balls will probably scare the play caller a little bit. And maybe that's justified. Like what we know about Goff is when it's blocked well for him and he has some pass catchers he can rely on. Going back to his Rams days, like he will put out a pretty efficient offense most of the time. But there's a couple games a year, like we saw in the Tampa game in week 2 this year, like we saw last week against the Texans, where he'll put the ball in harm's way, he'll miss throws, he'll be inaccurate, and that's just part of the variance of being a player at any position, but gets noticed more at quarterback when it does happen. And so I think like a game like that might decrease the amount of deep balls that are being thrown by the Lions, but it might not necessarily be a bad thing if they can still have an efficient passing game with lower average up the target and high yards after catch.
Awesome, Tage. Let's move on to Kansas City at Buffalo. The Chiefs are going to go on this road game against a really good team and try to remain undefeated. Maybe take us through the metrics that you find useful in evaluating this game and what you think will actually happen in the game.
Yeah, very excited for this game here, and something I'm watching out for. The matchup I think to watch in this game is the Bills pass offense versus the Chiefs pass defense. And so one thing that's popped up with the Chiefs pass defense is because of some of the injuries they've had in the secondary, where you still have Trent McDuffie as your number one corner, but Jalen Watson got injured in week 7, and he was their second corner, and their pass defense has dropped off a little bit since then. And so you're going up against a really good pass offense with Josh Allen leading the way in this game. And so I'm curious to see how Steve Spagnuolo plays this Bills offense, where you have a pass catching group that is probably going to be missing Dalton Kincaid, Keon Coleman, and Amari Cooper. And so will it be a lot of man coverage like the Chiefs usually do, and like the Bills have seen a lot of this year, because they don't necessarily have the receivers to separate from man, and what type of man coverages do the Chiefs end up playing if they choose to go down that route. And so I am expecting a lot of man coverage from the Chiefs in this game, just because they play it at a high rate naturally. The Bills see it at a high rate this season because of their pass catching group, and they'll even be more depleted in that area in this particular matchup just because of injuries.
Excellent. I definitely see the Bills' injuries as a problem. I personally can't believe that the Bills are favored in this game. That's not what my numbers have. And when you add on top of that maybe your top three of your top 4 pass catchers for Buffalo might not be there, it really calls into question like what Josh Allen can actually do. It might be a game where he needs to run a lot. Do you see Amari Cooper as the kind of the number one that the Bills need to kind of make a Super Bowl run?
Yeah, I don't know if Amari Cooper is necessarily like their wide receiver one. I think, when they have this group of pass catchers, they're kind of set up where they don't necessarily have a 25% target share type player, but I think that he provides a role in the offense that allows Khalil Shakir, Keon Coleman, and Dalton Kincaid to fit more into spots that they can be best utilized in. But it was kind of like a trade that the Bills probably felt they needed to make, just because they needed that type of receiver in their offense. Like they were missing someone opposite from Keon Coleman that could truly line up out wide, because when you look at the success rate when targeted for a lot of these Bills pass catchers after the top three, like Mac Hollins and Curtis Samuel and players like that, like just weren't being efficiently targeted like Kincaid, Shakir, and Coleman were. And so they probably felt like they had to bring in Cooper to kind of just provide another body type on the other side that allowed them to play more four wide receiver sets and be comfortable in those sets.
Excellent. Tej, let's move on to college football. We have a big game as Tennessee travels to Georgia to try to boot the Bulldogs out of the college football playoff. Georgia has 2 losses. However, Georgia's a 10.5-point favorite. We're getting news that Tennessee quarterback Nico might not play. So how would you evaluate these games in terms of metrics, and what do you see happening?
Yeah, so if Nico doesn't play in this game, I would assume that Josh Heupel relies more on the run game. And what I think is going to be a really interesting matchup in this game is like Georgia's pass defense has taken a step down from what it usually is this year. We've seen that in a lot of the games where teams have put up points against them. The Alabama game, especially in the first half, the Ole Miss game last weekend, where Ole Miss played 2 different quarterbacks in the first half and was having success with both of them in the pass game. So if Tennessee relies on the ground in this game because they feel less confident about their pass offense with either an injured Nico or without him, it'll be interesting to see how Georgia kind of defends that, because you have this Tennessee rush offense that hasn't been super explosive this year. They've had a higher success rate than they've had like an EPA per rush, and so maybe they're happy with just getting those 4 or 5 yard carries and then taking shots in the pass game when they feel like they have the advantageous setup. But like Georgia's run defense should be able to control Tennessee's rush offense, and we saw that last year where first play of the game, Jalen Wright 75-yard touchdown. But then Tennessee just wasn't able to do much on the ground after that once Georgia adjusted. And so I'm sure Kirby Smart will be ready to try to defend the run, based on how that game started last year for them.
Yeah, it's certainly going to be an interesting matchup with Tennessee's offense versus Georgia's defense. Georgia's defense hasn't really been the same as last year, but I do find even the idea of questioning a Kirby Smart defense kind of interesting. It's one of those things where I had a lot of high expectations for this Georgia defense coming into the season because they didn't lose as many stars as they usually do to the NFL. They start the season kind of weak, but then they come back pretty strong against Texas. And now I'm just looking at the rushing market for Dylan Sampson, the primary running back for Tennessee. His total has usually been in the hundreds, like low 100s, like 102, 105. It's 92. So that's certainly, I would say that is the market suggesting that Georgia is going to be able to contain him, even if they haven't been up to their usual standards this year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that is a really good point. Like, I mean, Georgia's pass defense, I don't think is particularly that good, but the run defense is still pretty good to me. Both like eye test and metrics wise. So yeah, they should be able to contain Samson a little bit better than probably other teams have this year. And then yeah, we still have the question about if Nico will play and what that means for how often they run the ball, but also like what their pass offense efficiency would look like with and without him.
Yeah, for sure. I'm not even sure I know who the backup would be if he can't go, but it will be an interesting test on the road in a game that means everything for Georgia, in a game that means a ton for Tennessee too, right? At one loss, a team that has a win over Alabama and is certainly in playoff contention, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, this is a high playoff leverage game here where you saw the committee not have a ton of respect for Georgia's resume at this point in the season, with where they placed them on Tuesday night, like right outside the playoff. And so, like, if Georgia were to lose this game, like you could only assume that they were out. Although I'm sure people would make the argument like some of the wins that they've had like would justify being in, but at 3 losses, Georgia would probably not make the playoff, which is pretty crazy to say
It
based on
is.
what their expectations were preseason.
It is. And, my numbers still really like this Georgia team. you lose you lose like a crazy game against Alabama that kind of could have gone in any of either
Hmm.
way towards the end there, and then kind of not just showing up at Ole Miss last week obviously doesn't help, but the schedule for them was a lot tougher than say like a Texas who lost to Georgia and even in the SEC is still waiting around for their next toughest opponent going to A&M at the end of the year.
Yeah, no, I mean that's true. Like, I mean, now that we kind of look back on Texas's schedule, we can see that Michigan was obviously not an impressive win, like we thought it was at the time, and so yeah, Texas' resume is definitely pretty weak, which is why like the committee's rankings were pretty interesting on Tuesday to kind of decide, to like where they wanted to put certain SEC teams. Like obviously, the Big Ten was given a lot of respect in the rankings, then either because the SEC has beaten itself up, or you have a lot of these crossover games like Georgia Texas happening, and Texas not being able to win that one, like the committee has just been a little bit lower on the SEC, because of the crossover, I assume.
Yeah, for sure. Let's get into those playoff rankings. The committee came out with their second one on Tuesday. Any huge surprises for you?
Yeah, I mean the main surprise for me was the Georgia ranking. Like I thought they've had a good resume to put them at, well, I guess they're ranked 12, but because of the G5, they're currently out of the playoff. Like I was very surprised by that, especially when you look at like Kelly Ford's most deserving rankings. I believe they were third or fourth on those, in terms of just like how well they've done relative to what the number 12 team in the country would be doing with their schedule. So that was a little bit surprising to me with those rankings, and then also like Miami. Miami and BYU flipping spots was also interesting to me, because it comes down to like a resume versus power rating thing, where BYU's resume is great, like one of the best in the country so far. In terms of like the wins that they've had, they haven't been like super convincing in their wins. Neither has Miami. So like I'm curious to kind of see like how the committee figures that out, because if there were a situation where the Big 12 champion ends up getting the 4 seed, which would mean like the ACC champion, which I assume is Miami, is getting the 3 seed. The 5 seed would have a huge advantage in the playoffs. So if that's the loser of Oregon, Ohio State, they would get to play Boise State in the first round game, and then BYU in the second round game. And like they would be double digit favorites in both of those.
Yeah, that's an interesting quirk of the system. I was actually reading that article that you tweeted out about that. Are you sure that it's necessarily? I mean, I don't think the second team in the Big Ten fears either Miami or BYU, right?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, it would still be a situation where like the 5 seed would be a decent favorite over the 4 seed, whether it's BYU or Miami. I just think like because of Miami's explosiveness on offense, you're probably a little bit more worried about playing them. But either way, I'm sure they would feel confident going into the game, and the market would probably reflect that.
Okay, so I kind of take that back. I did not realize I actually have BYU at 33rd in my member numbers, and Miami
Hmm.
is much higher at 11th. I just don't feel like you really fear this Miami team. I know Cam Ward has been great, and maybe not so much in this last game when they got upset at Georgia Tech, but it was a Miami team that kind of didn't come into the season with not great expectations, right? They've obviously played well, but when you're looking at a schedule where you were kind of looking to play Florida State as your like big vindication game, and then Florida State kind of falls
Yeah.
off the map in terms of any kind of performance. Um, yeah, I don't know. I guess my numbers like Miami, so I probably shouldn't denigrate them too much. But I do think it's not. I think the argument for wanting to not win the Big Ten holds up no matter who is in that 4 seed.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree with that. Like, I mean, they will have, a relatively easy path to the semifinal. If they get the 5 seed, and then like you have a situation where it's different than the 14 playoff because one of the actual top 3 teams could get knocked out before they reach the semifinal themselves. So it would be like a very good spot to be in. Even if you have to play the extra game, like you could argue a little bit less rest there, but you would still
Sure.
be able to get to the semifinal easier than probably like the 3 or the 2 seed that's going to have to play a legit Power 4 team in the quarterfinals.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, right now in the Big Ten, if we presume Ohio State beats Indiana, and I mean, we're headed towards Ohio State and Oregon in the Big Ten championship game, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the legit argument is that the loser might be better off, even though they have to play an extra game.
Yeah, I know it is a very like weird spot to be in, where like obviously you're not gonna lose the game intentionally if you're one of those teams, but I think once their coaches explain to them, like after the loss, like it's actually a good spot to be in. I'm sure the players will feel okay about ending up in that spot.
Yeah, for sure. Another thought I've had this week, Tej, is that Ohio State is at Northwestern this week. They play Indiana the week after that and Michigan the week after that. They're going to be sizable favorites in both those games, but Indiana is undefeated. That all of a sudden becomes actually a bigger game than Michigan, although don't tell that to Ohio State fans. Are you going to play? If you're up 28 at half, are you playing anyone in the second half? Are you even prepping? Are you even doing any reps in practice for Northwestern?
No, I don't think you're preparing a ton for Northwestern. I'm sure that the Ohio State coaching staff has started to really look ahead to the Indiana and Michigan games. I would even think like with how much focus Ryan Day had coming into the season on like beating Michigan this year, like that was the thing he had to do that he hasn't been able to do as of late. Like I'm sure Ohio State was even spending parts of practice, like even just preparing for that game in particular early in the season, and then maybe once they realized Michigan wasn't that good, they toned down that portion of practice time to Michigan. But I'm sure that there was some of it early when they thought that might be a bigger game than it is right now.
If you're Ohio State, you're absolutely prepping for Indiana right now. I mean, you'd be crazy. You'd be crazy not to. Like they've been really good, and it's one of these teams that's pretty interesting to me because they have no business being as good as they are. But you bring in a new coach that had a track record in his previous positions. You have a quarterback in Curtis Rourke that I was actually looking at his Ohio numbers. They were decent. They were very decent
Mm-hmm.
for a MAC team, and I actually, I really liked Indiana against Michigan State because I think Michigan State is actually a pretty decent football team, and they just crushed them. So, yeah, if I'm Ohio State, I'm definitely prepping for Indiana. So,
Yeah.
all right, Tej, give us a surprising football prediction.
Yeah, surprising football prediction I have right now is that the Cardinals will win the NFC West, and might even win a playoff game off of that. Where I look at Arizona right now, and I can see Kyler Murray is just playing at a high level. Their offensive line is fine, like it's not anything crazy, but his elusiveness in the pocket, his mobility allows him to create outside of it. But you look at just kind of some of their weapons on offense, where James Conner is rushing the ball almost as well as anyone in the league this year, probably outside of Derrick Henry and Saquon Barkley. And so they're doing a great job using Conner in both the run and the pass game. And they just have a lot of pass catching options that can all show up on any given Sunday, where Trey McBride is a true tight end one in this league. Marvin Harrison Jr. has his moments, but they also have Michael Wilson who's shown up from time to time. And then on defense, their biggest concern coming into this year because of depth and some injuries was their pass rush. But the pass rush has looked a little bit better these past 2 weeks. they played easier opponents. So that's something I'll monitor the rest of the way. But I think that they have the offense and then enough juice on their pass defense to end up winning a pretty tight NFC West right now.
I love that you brought that up because I've actually been fading Arizona for a while this season. Starting in the preseason, I just thought they didn't have much on the defensive side of the ball at all, and I think you had to question whether Kyler Murray could come back and be the quarterback that he was. You've been seeing he's been injured over the last couple of years, and then by a lot of the key metrics I look at, like he's steadily declined over the last 3 seasons. Murray's been fantastic. I mean, I think he's been better than he's ever been. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so like and that's the main driving force in NFL success, right? If you have a quarterback that's killing it, it's great. I'm still a little bit skeptical about the weapons. I completely agree that Trey McBride is an elite tight end, and that's obviously good. But I think they do need other guys to step up, right? Like they do need Marvin Harrison Jr. to to be the best wide receiver out of the draft. I mean, and that definitely hasn't been the case, right? Do you have any thoughts of why he's just kind of struggled as a rookie?
Yeah, I was looking at kind of like some of his usage, and like he ranks I think like 30th in yards per out run this year. So fine for a rookie, but
Yeah, that's not
you
bad.
obviously had higher expectations given his pedigree and his draft position. But I think that the way he was used in the offense early in the season was on a lot of vertical routes, and where he really works best is on in breaking routes. And so when he was running a lot of like goes and posts, he wasn't able to get a ton of separation. But now they're using him better on like more dig routes, more in routes, and you can really see him generate more separation off of those. And also he's just like moving upfield as he catches the ball and is able to work some yards after catch. And so as they continue to figure out like how they can best utilize his route tree, I'm a little bit more bullish on what he can be in the offense, even if the targets haven't been super successful yet.
I was looking at an ESPN article about his work ethic. It was pretty interesting. They talked about, during his days at Ohio State, he'd be in at, before the first meeting, catching 200 balls off the jug machine. Like they say like the jug machine is his best friend, and he's got like calluses from it. So interested to see where Marvin Harrison Jr. ends up, despite his pedigree as an Ohio State wide receiver. I do think he is going to get better. I do got to ask you about the defense, though, because I really do have questions. I just don't see a ton of talent on that team. They're pretty bad when I look at passing success rate allowed. But you do see hope. You do see hope in that pass rush.
I see a little bit like the pass rush is not that strong. I've just seen some improvement these past 2 weeks, which has got me a little bit excited about them. Like obviously have to adjust for opponent there, but they have some guys I think that can get to the quarterback, like Zaven Collins, LJ Collier, like Khalil White coming down from the second level and blitzing. And so like Jonathan Gannon, he shows like when he was in Philadelphia, he was very like rush for. I have the best defensive line, so like I'm not going to stunt, I'm not going to blitz, and I'll still be able to generate pressure and sacks. And now we see him like with a Cardinals defensive line where they are not talented at all, but he's doing a lot of unique things to generate pressure. And so I like to
Mhm.
buy into defensive play callers that try to be unique, like a Brian Flores to try to affect the quarterback, because I do think that when you have like the talent disadvantage, that's the type of stuff that you have to do.
Tej Seth, thank you so much for coming on the Football Analytics Show. Please let everyone know where they can get your insights.
Yeah, thanks for having me again. Always really fun to come on here. And yeah, I mean, you can listen to me on the Stats and Scheme podcast that I do with my friend Sean Syed.
And what about social media?
Oh yeah, on Twitter you can find me at Tej FB Analytics.
I think you have the funniest football analytics account I really love the stuff about how you're going to stick a mouthpiece in your helmet in homage to Brian Branch and stuff. That's some good stuff. I think I included you once as a humor nugget. I gotta like troll your account for more stuff. But you also have the insights too, right? So some hardcore data that can help people get more knowledgeable about the NFL. So yeah. Anyways, love the work that you were doing there. Thanks again for coming on.
Appreciate it. Yeah.
You've been listening to the Football Analytics Show podcast. My name is Ed Fang, your host. Just a reminder, you can grab my free sports betting newsletter if you're looking for action on any given weekend. Check that out at thepowerrank.com. Thanks again for listening, and I will talk to you again next week.